The moment I realized what I'd done, my stomach dropped so fast I nearly threw up on my own phone. I'd just sent a voice memo of my son crying, full volume, snot, and everything, to the most dangerous alphas in the state of Colorado. Not my landlord, not my mother, not even the wrong pizza place, the Calloway triplets, and the worst part, the absolute gut punch, earth-swallowing worst part? One of them had already typed back. Is that a baby? My name is Elliot Voss. I have made exactly 3 catastrophic decisions in my 24 years of life. The first was dropping out of Colorado State to follow a man who swore he loved me. The second was believing him. The third happened 47 seconds ago when I hit send on the wrong contact. But right now, none of that mattered. Because Theo was screaming. Not the soft, fussy kind of crying that meant he was tired. This was the sharp, breathless, I'm going to lose my mind cry that only happened when his stomach was empty and I had nothing left to give him. Okay, baby, I know. I bounced him against my hip, pacing our tiny studio apartment in Denver's Riverside district, where the radiator only worked when it felt like it and the downstairs neighbor played bass guitar at 2 a.m. Theo was 8 months old. 8 months old, and the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to me. Not because I didn't love him, but because I loved him so much it lived in my throat like a permanent bruise. The formula canister on the counter was empty. I'd already shaken it upside down twice. There was nothing left. Here's the thing about being a telepathic Omega with a screaming baby, 0 formula, and $43 in a checking account. Your brain does not function at full capacity. I could hear the thoughts of every person within a 3-apartment radius. Mrs. Patel next door was mentally composing a strongly worded letter to the landlord. The guy above me was rehearsing a breakup speech he'd never actually deliver. The teenager down the hall was catastrophizing about a math test. And me? I was trying to find a contact named Carla, my friend, my lifeline, the only person who still returned my calls, while simultaneously preventing my son from launching himself off my hip like a small, furious rocket. I typed fast. I typed desperate. Carla, I'm so sorry to ask again, but Theo hasn't eaten in 6 hours and I'm completely out. Do you have any formula I can borrow? I'll pay you back Friday, I promise. I hit send, and then I looked at the name at the top of the screen. C. Calloway. Not Carla. C. Calloway. The air left my lungs like someone had punched through my chest and taken it personally. My telepathy doesn't work through phones. Thank God, because if it did, I thought I would have passed out from the sheer volume of whatever was happening on the other end of that message. Instead, all I had was silence. 22 seconds of it. I counted. Then the typing bubble appeared. I stopped breathing. See? The Calloway name wasn't just a name in Colorado. It was a warning. The kind of name that got whispered in pack circles with the same energy people used for natural disasters and tax audits. The Calloway triplets, Caden, Cole, Oz, and crew were the reigning alpha kings of the Western Cascade Pack, one of the most powerful Omega governing packs in the entire country. They controlled territory that stretched from Denver's city limits all the way into the Rockies. They had lawyers, enforcers, and an actual PR team. They were also, according to every piece of gossip I'd ever accidentally absorbed through someone else's mind, completely and utterly terrifying. Not cartoon villain terrifying. Worse. The quiet kind. The kind that smiled at you while making a decision that would restructure your entire life. I had met them once, 14 months ago, at a pack gala I was never supposed to attend. And then I disappeared before sunrise and never looked back. My hands were shaking so hard Theo grabbed my finger to steady himself. The message came through in 3 parts. And first, is that a baby? Second, who is this? Third, and this is the one that made my vision go white at the edges. Elliot, just my name. 1 word, But whoever typed it knew exactly who I was without me saying a single thing, which meant one of the 3 most powerful alphas in Colorado had my contacts saved in his phone. Under what name? I had absolutely no idea, and I did not want to find out. I looked at Theo, at his fat little cheeks, his dark curls damp with tears, his eyes that were, if I was being brutally honest with myself, the exact same shade of storm gray as the Calloway brothers. I had kept this secret for 8 months. I had planned to keep it forever. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Here is a list of things a rational person would do in this situation. Block the number, delete the thread, move to another state, change their name, possibly fake their own death. Here is what I actually did. I sat down on the floor. Not gracefully, not with any kind of dignity. I just folded, right there between the second-hand couch and the kitchen tiles, Theo in my lap, formula canister mocking me from the counter, and stared at that single word on my screen. Elliot. He typed it like he already knew, like this wasn't a surprise at all, which was insane because I had been careful. I'd left Denver for 4 months after I found out I was pregnant. I'd had Theo at a midwife center in New Mexico. I'd used my mother's maiden name on the paperwork. I had a burner email, a private social media, and enough anxiety to fuel a small city. But here was the cold, clarifying truth cutting through all of that like a blade through fog. I had apparently never deleted C. Calloway from my phone. Because of course I hadn't. Because somewhere in the part of my brain that was still 23 and standing in a gala hallway with my pulse in my throat, I'd saved it like it meant something. Idiot, I thought. Theo patted my knee. Yeah, I told him. I know. He made a sound that was almost definitely judgment. I looked at the screen again. The typing bubble had disappeared, which was somehow worse. A quiet alpha was a thinking alpha, and a thinking Calloway was a dangerous one. I had 2 options. Option A, don't respond. Pray he assumed it was a wrong number. Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder and investing heavily in disguises. Option B, respond. Uncontrol the narrative. Lie convincingly and immediately. I chose option B because I am an Omega with telepathy and a theater minor, and I have never once in my life backed down from something just because it was actively trying to ruin me. I typed, sorry, wrong number. I hit send. I waited. 3 seconds. That's my contact name in your phone, Elliot. You saved it yourself. My eye twitched. Okay, smart alpha, noted. I typed, phones get hacked all the time. The response came back in 4 seconds flat. Whose baby is that? Not a question. A declaration. Like he'd already run the math and was just waiting for me to confirm the answer he already had. And here's where my telepathy, which I had been quietly blessing for keeping me 1 step ahead of danger my entire life, decided to completely betray me. Because in that exact moment, my ability flickered. Just once. Just a pulse. And through it, clear as a struck bell, I felt 3 minds snap toward mine simultaneously. Sharp, focused, and hunting. They already knew. I need to explain something about my ability before this story goes any further because it matters. I'm what the PAC medical community calls a Class 4 telepathic Omega, which is a very clinical way of saying I've been accidentally eavesdropping on people's private thoughts since I was 6 years old, and it has never once been useful in a normal and socially acceptable way. I can't turn it off. I can only manage it. On good days, other people's thoughts are background noise, like a TV in another room. I can tune it out, focus on my own mind, live something resembling a normal life. On bad days, or when I'm emotionally raw, sleep-deprived, and sitting on my kitchen floor with an empty formula canister, the signal goes full volume, and I hear everything. The Calloway triplets had always been different, though. Even at the gala, 14 months ago, when I'd been careful to keep my walls up and my distance deliberate, Their minds had reached through my defenses like they belonged there. Caden's thoughts were like architecture, precise, structured, and cold in a way that wasn't cruel, just constructed. Like he'd built walls inside himself the same way other people build houses. Cole's were warmer, guarded, but warm. The kind of mind that laughed at things it didn't want to find funny. Crew's were the quietest. I'd still water with impossible depth. Right now, all three of them felt like static lightning, and they were pointed directly at me. I pressed my back against the kitchen cabinet and pulled Theo closer. He'd stopped crying, because Theo, bless his chaotic little soul, had the emotional range of someone twice his age and the attention span of a hummingbird. He was now deeply fascinated by the drawstring on my hoodie. But I couldn't focus on him right now, because something was happening that had never happened before in 24 years of living with this ability. I was receiving 3 distinct signals from people who were not within physical range. That wasn't possible. Telepathy had a radius. Mine maxed out at roughly 40 feet on a clear day. These men were... I didn't even know where they were. Their compound was somewhere north of Denver, up toward the mountains, easily 40 miles away. And yet, where is he? That was Caden. Not the architecture mind. Stripped down to 4 words, efficient as a scalpel. Stay calm. That was Cole, and he wasn't talking to me. He was saying it to himself, or maybe to his brothers. And then Crew's mind, the quiet, deep water one, brushed mine with something that wasn't a thought at all. It was a feeling. Recognition. Raw, bone-deep, devastating recognition. Like a door being opened in a house you thought you'd burned down. My phone buzzed. 1 message. No name attached, because it wasn't from the contact thread. It was a new number entirely. Don't run, Elliot. We're already on our way. I looked at my son. He looked back at me with those storm-gray eyes that I had spent 8 months pretending came from my side of the family. Okay, I said, very calmly, to no one in particular. Okay. My telepathy was still buzzing. 3 signals, steady and deliberate, moving closer by the second. I could feel the distance closing like a change in air pressure. Like the moment before a storm when everything goes quiet and the birds disappear and your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. They were coming. All 3 of them. And somewhere beneath the panic, beneath the formula empty counter, the shaking hands, and the very rational urge to throw my phone into the Denver River, was a thought I absolutely refused to examine. Part of me had been waiting for this moment since the night I left. I sat with that thought for exactly 2 seconds before I did what any reasonable, emotionally intelligent person would do. I shoved it into the deepest, darkest corner of my brain, locked the door, and threw away the key. We're leaving, I told Theo. Theo blew a spit bubble. That's not helpful. I was already on my feet, already scanning the apartment with the frantic energy of someone who had exactly 0 plan and approximately negative time to make one. My go bag was under the bed. An old hiking backpack I'd kept packed since Theo was 3 months old, because when you're a telepathic Omega hiding a secret the size of a small mountain range, you stay ready. I pulled it out, checked the zipper, grabbed Theo's spare onesies from the drying rack by the window. Yet my phone buzzed again. I didn't look at it. My telepathy, however, had other ideas. The 3 signals were still there. Closer now, distinct and separate like 3 different instruments playing the same chord. Caden's mind had shifted from that cold, architectural precision into something sharper, focused. The kind of mental energy that made me think of a chess player who'd already seen 12 moves ahead and was simply waiting for you to catch up. Cole's mind felt like barely contained forward motion. Not rage. Something more complicated than that. The mental equivalent of a man gripping a steering wheel too hard and telling himself to breathe. And Crew. Crew's signal was doing something I had no category for. It kept brushing against mine. Gentle. Deliberate. Like a knock on a door rather than a demand to open it. Like he knew I could feel him and was choosing softness anyway. So I hated that. Most of all, I zipped Theo into his little blue jacket, the one with the barriers on the hood that made him look aggressively adorable, and was reaching for my keys when my telepathy spiked so hard I grabbed the counter to stay upright. They were close. Not 40 miles away anymore. Not even 4 blocks. The lobby. They were in the lobby of my building. Absolutely not, I said out loud to the universe. To whatever cosmic force thought this was an appropriate Tuesday evening. Theo grabbed my nose. I peeled his hand off gently, slung the backpack over one shoulder, and made for the door. I opened it and stopped, because standing in the hallway, not downstairs in the lobby, not outside on the street where I'd had a full escape route mentally mapped, but right there, 6 feet away, filling the narrow corridor of the 3rd floor of my very average Denver apartment building, were 3 of the most dangerously composed men I had ever seen in my life. The Calloway triplets, in the flesh, in my hallway, looking at me like they'd been expecting this exact moment for a very long time. They were identical in the way that only triplets could be. Same sharp jaw, same dark hair, same height that forced me to tilt my chin up at an angle I deeply resented. But up close, the differences cut through immediately. Caden stood in the center. His expression was the human equivalent of a closed courthouse. Nothing moved on his face that he didn't allow to move, and right now he was allowing exactly nothing. Cole was to his left, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was looking at me the way someone looks at a puzzle that just rearranged itself into a new shape when they weren't paying attention. Crew stood slightly behind both of them, and he was the only one whose eyes went straight to Theo. Theo, who took one long look at all 3 of them and reached out both arms like he'd been waiting for a specific set of people his entire 8-month existence. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. "Hi," I said, because I have never in my life let a silence win. Cole's eye twitched. "That's your opening?" he said. "Hi. Would you prefer I scream?" "At this point," he started. "Cole." Caden's voice was quiet. That was somehow worse than loud. He looked at me, and in his storm gray eyes, the ones currently being mirrored back at him from the face of an 8-month-old in a bear ear hood, didn't flinch once. "Invite us in, Elliot." Respectfully, I said, "No." A muscle moved in his jaw, just one, controlled immediately. "That wasn't a request." "I know," I said. "Mine wasn't a negotiation either, so here we are." Crew made a sound that might have been a laugh and immediately converted it into a cough when Caden looked at him. My telepathy was running hot, and I was actively trying not to read them directly. Not because I was being polite, but because whatever was sitting in these 3 men's minds right now felt like standing too close to an open flame. Warm. Consuming. The kind of heat that didn't warn you before it became a problem. Theo, completely unbothered by the geopolitical crisis unfolding around him, was still reaching toward Crew with the focused determination of someone who had made a decision and intended to see it through. Crew looked at those tiny outstretched hands. Something moved across his face. Fast, unguarded, gone before I could name it fully. But I felt it. And it cracked something loose in my chest that I absolutely could not afford right now. "Elliot," Caden said, softer this time. Just barely. "Or please." Of all the weapons Caden Calloway could have pulled out in that hallway, he chose that one. Not authority, not legal threats, not the full weight of a pack that could make my landlord mysteriously lose my lease before morning. Just please. One word. Quiet as a confession. And I hated how much it landed. I stood in my doorway for 3 full seconds, doing the internal math that every Omega learns to do fast. Threat assessment, exit options, emotional cost, collateral damage. My telepathy was humming at the edges, not quite reading them, but feeling the shape of what was sitting in that hallway. It wasn't aggression. It was something older than that. Something that had been sitting in a locked room for a long time and was only now, standing 6 feet from a baby in a bear ear hood, starting to breathe again. That scared me more than aggression would have. 5 minutes, I said. Cole blinked. That's it? Would you like 4? His mouth opened. Closed. He looked at Caden like he was requesting permission to be exasperated, and Caden gave the smallest nod that somehow communicated yes, but quietly. I stepped back from the door. They came in. 3 large alphas in my 400-square-foot studio apartment was, objectively, a spatial problem. Caden took 2 steps in and stopped, cataloging the room with those courthouse eyes. Cole moved toward the window like he needed something solid at his back. Crew stopped just inside the door, looked at the empty formula canister on the counter, and went very still in a way that made my chest tighten for reasons I refused to investigate. I set Theo on his playmat in the center of the room, mostly so I had something to do with my hands, and partly so he stopped reaching for Crew like a tiny homing missile. Theo immediately pulled himself up on the edge of the mat, looked at all 3 men, and pointed at Crew. Traitor. Cute kid, Cole said, in the flat tone of someone who was saying one thing and thinking 17 others. Thank you, I said. He has my personality. God help us all, Cole muttered. I heard that. I know, I said it at normal volume. Caden cut a look at his brother that ended the commentary instantly. Then he looked back at me. And there it was again. That controlled stillness that somehow managed to feel louder than anything else in the room. How old? He said. Not how old is he? Not a full sentence. Just the question stripped to its bones because Caden Calloway, apparently, did not waste words on anything he considered already understood. 8 months, I said. The number sat in the room like a dropped glass. Cole did the math. I watched him do it. Watched the moment the calculation landed behind his eyes, and the carefully maintained tension in his jaw shifted into something raw. Crew hadn't moved from his spot near the door, but his eyes were on Theo, steady and unreadable, and my telepathy was catching the edge of something from him that felt like a man standing at the top of a very high place, looking down, not afraid of the fall, but deeply aware of it. Why didn't you tell us? Caden said. That's a big question for minute 2 of your 5, I said. Elliot. Caden. His eyes sharpened. He wasn't used to his name being said back at him like a checkmate. I could feel the slight recalibration happening behind those storm-gray eyes. The quiet adjustment of a man who had walked in expecting one version of this conversation and was now meeting a different one entirely. Good. I crossed my arms and leaned against the kitchen counter, putting the empty formula canister directly in my peripheral vision so I could remember what the actual stakes were here. Not feelings. Not the way Crew kept looking at my son like he was something precious and already familiar. Not the way Cole's carefully constructed irritation was paper-thin over something that looked a lot like grief. Stakes. Formula. Theo's next feeding. That was what mattered. I left, I said, keeping my voice even, because I had no reason to stay. What happened at that gala was one night. Nobody made any promises. Nobody asked for names. I handled the situation. You handled it, Cole repeated slowly. Yes. Alone. Clearly. For 8 months. Cole, I can count. Thank you. He laughed, short and sharp, the involuntary kind that escapes before you can stop it. He pressed his fingers to his mouth immediately after, like he was annoyed at himself for it. My telepathy flickered again. Just one pulse. Just enough. And what I caught from Cole in that half-second before I slammed my walls back up was not anger. It was the specific, gutting feeling of someone who had been looking for something for a very long time, and had just found it in the last place they ever expected to look. I did not let that show on my face, but it settled somewhere behind my ribs and refused to move. Theo chose that precise moment to let go of the playmat, take 2 wobbling, determined steps across the floor, and grab Crew's pant leg with both fists. The room stopped. Crew looked down at those tiny hands gripping his jeans. His throat moved. One slow swallow, carefully controlled, except that my ability doesn't care about control. What came off him in that moment was not a thought. It was a sound, somewhere deep inside him, that had no words attached. The kind of recognition that lives in the body before the mind ever catches up. He reached down, very slowly, and picked my son up. Theo grabbed his collar and immediately tried to eat it. Crew let him. And that, more than anything that had been said in the last 4 minutes, Mike was the thing I absolutely could not afford to feel anything about. "Time's up," I said, my voice impressively steady for a man whose entire chest had just caved in. Caden looked at me. "We're not leaving," he said. "I have a door. We're aware. And a phone. I can call building security. Elliot." His voice dropped, quiet and direct. "The formula canister is empty. You have $43 in your account. And our son just took his first steps toward my brother." Everything in me went cold, then hot, then something I had no name for. "How do you know my account balance?" I said very carefully. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. And that was the moment I understood, with absolute and total clarity, that the Calloway triplets had not found me tonight by accident. They had been looking. I let that sentence sit in the front of my mind for exactly 3 seconds before I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped being scared. Not because the situation wasn't terrifying. It absolutely was. 3 alpha kings in my apartment, one of them holding my son like he already knew how, and at least one of them knowing my bank balance better than my own mother did. Terrifying. Completely. But fear, in my experience, was only useful for about 30 seconds. After that, it just got in the way. I uncrossed my arms, walked to the kitchen, and filled Theo's empty sippy cup with water from the tap. Slowly. Like I had all the time in the world, and none of this was dismantling me from the inside. "How long?" I said, my back to all 3 of them. Caden answered. 7 months. I gripped the cup a little harder. 7 months. Theo was 8 months old, which meant they had started looking 1 month after he was born, which meant somebody had known about the pregnancy before I'd even delivered, which meant my careful, deliberate, thoroughly constructed disappearing act had lasted approximately as long as a paper umbrella in a rainstorm. "You let me struggle," I said. Still calm. Impressively calm, honestly. "For 7 months, you knew where I was, and you let me sit here with an empty formula canister and $43. "We didn't know about Theo until 3 weeks ago," Cole said. And something in his voice had lost the sharp edge it had been carrying since he walked in. "We knew you were in Denver. We didn't know why you'd left. We didn't know you were struggling?" I turned around. He met my eyes and didn't look away. "Yes. And 3 weeks ago? Someone in your building's PAC registry filed a secondary dependent," Caden said. "An unnamed Omega infant, storm gray eyes, Calloway scent markers." I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Mrs. Patel. And I loved that woman. I genuinely did. She brought Theo little knitted socks and always held the elevator. But Mrs. Patel was also 72 years old, deeply embedded in Denver's PAC community, and apparently had absolutely no concept of minding her business. "I'm going to have a conversation with my neighbor," I said. "She probably saved your son from another month of empty formula canisters," Crew said. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken since walking in. His voice was lower than his brother's, unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't perform anything, didn't reach for effect, just landed where it landed and waited. Theo, currently sitting in the crook of his arm like he'd been there his whole life, made a sound of enthusiastic agreement. I pointed at my son. "You. Stop helping them." Theo blew another spit bubble. He has your mouth, Cole said. Careful, I said. That sounded almost like a compliment. It wasn't. It kind of was. Cole looked at the ceiling. I watched him fight a smile and lose by about 40%. Caden stepped forward, and the room reorganized itself around the movement the way rooms tended to when he moved through them. Not because he was loud, because he was the kind of person whose stillness had gravity. He stopped 2 feet from me, which was close enough that I could smell him properly for the first time since the hallway. This was a problem. Alpha scent was already a lot under normal circumstances. Caden's was cedar and cold mountain air, and something underneath both of those things that had no name but my body recognized anyway, deep and involuntary, the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. My telepathy gave one hot pulse. I shut it down hard. We're not here to take anything from you, he said, quiet and direct, eyes on mine. We're not here to make threats or file pack claims or put our names on legal documents tonight. Then what are you here for? I said. To see him. A pause. Just one beat. And to make sure you're not drowning. I hated that answer. I hated it because it was exactly the right answer, and I had been so prepared for the wrong one. I had my entire defensive argument loaded and ready. All my legal knowledge about Omega autonomy and voluntary pack separation and the rights of an unregistered Omega parent. And he'd walked right past all of it with 8 words and a grocery store run's worth of genuine concern. I'm fine, I said. His eyes moved to the empty canister on the counter. I'm managing, I corrected. Elliot. The formula situation was temporary. I get paid Friday. It's Tuesday. I'm aware of what day it is. Caden. Theo hasn't eaten in 6 hours. The words landed flat and factual and devastating, and the worst part was that he didn't say them to hurt me. He said them the way a person states something true because pretending it isn't true helps nobody. My throat tightened. I did not let it show. Cole was already moving toward the door, and I started to say something sharp about uninvited guests leaving through the same door they entered, but he wasn't leaving. He was picking up a bag I hadn't noticed sitting just outside in the hallway. Large, dark green, the kind of bag that looked like it had been packed with intention. He set it on my counter without a word and unzipped it. Formula. 2 large canisters. Diapers. A small sealed container of what looked like actual prepared baby food. I stared at it. My chest did something complicated and embarrassing. We stopped on the way, Cole said, with the careful casualness of someone who had rehearsed that exact sentence to sound like it was nothing. It was not nothing, and every single one of us in that room knew it. I stood there looking at 2 canisters of formula and a bag of baby food, and I did something I absolutely refused to do in front of 3 Alpha Kings. I almost cried. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind with sound and shoulders shaking. The quiet, mortifying kind where your eyes just fill up without your permission, and you have to do a very specific kind of blinking to convince the tears they made a wrong turn. I blinked 3 times, looked at the ceiling, exhaled slowly through my nose. Theo picked that exact moment to make a happy sound from Crew's arms, reaching toward the bag like he already knew what was in it. Smart kid. Terrible timing. Thank you, I said. The words came out smaller than I intended. I cleared my throat and tried again with more structural integrity. That was unnecessary, but I appreciate it. Unnecessary, Cole repeated. Considerate, I revised. He hadn't eaten in 6 hours, Elliot. Cole, I swear to everything holy. If you say that one more time, I will telepathically give you a migraine. Silence. All 3 of them looked at me. Right. I had not meant to say that part out loud. Caden's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, recalculating, the way it does when new information enters a system that thought it already had complete data. Cole's mouth opened slowly. You're telepathic. Occasionally. That's not how telepathy works. You'd be surprised. Can you hear us right now? His voice had taken on a very specific quality. The quality of a man rapidly reviewing every thought he'd had in the last 20 minutes. "I have walls," I said. "I'm not actively reading anyone, and that's not how I operate." "But you could." "Cole, everyone in this room has thoughts they'd prefer to keep private. I respect that. I maintain boundaries. I'm not in your head." He did not look fully convinced. Honestly, fair. Because the truth was more complicated than that, and the truth was this. My walls were solid, and I kept them solid because living without them was like standing in the middle of a highway trying to have a conversation. But those walls had been running at half capacity since the moment these three walked in, because something about their combined presence did something irritating and involuntary to my ability. Like tuning forks. Like they operated at a frequency my telepathy recognized without my consent. I had noticed this at the gala 14 months ago and filed it under Things We Do Not Think About in the same folder as their eye color, and the way crew had looked at me across a crowded room like I was the only stationary thing in it. Big folder. Very full. Caden was still watching me with that quiet, systematic attention that made the back of my neck warm. "How long have you been telepathic?" he said. "Since I was 6. It's congenital. And before you ask, no. Theo doesn't show any indicators yet, and yes, I have him monitored by a PAC-registered physician, and yes, I've been handling it without any support network or PAC resources, and yes, before you make that face, I know how that sounds." "What face?" Caden said. "The face that means you have an opinion you're deciding how to package." "A beat." "I have several," he admitted. "I bet." I reached for one of the formula canisters, cracked the seal, and started measuring a bottle for Theo because whatever this conversation was about to become, my son needed to eat first, and the rest of this could wait 300 seconds. Crew carried Theo to the kitchen counter without being asked, positioning him so I could start feeding him easily, and the seamlessness of it, the quiet practicality of this man adjusting himself around my son's needs like it was already instinct, did something to my composure that I chose to aggressively ignore. Or Theo grabbed the bottle with both hands and went silent for the first time in 2 hours. The apartment felt different in that silence, less like a standoff, more like something that hadn't found its name yet. Cole leaned against the window frame, arms still crossed but looser now, watching Theo eat with an expression I was trying very hard not to read even accidentally. I caught the edge of it anyway, just the surface, just the texture of it. It felt like someone carefully opening a door they'd kept closed so long they'd stopped remembering what was behind it. "You said you left because there were no promises made," Caden said. He wasn't accusing. He was reconstructing, methodically, the way he seemed to do everything. "That's correct. You assumed we wouldn't want to know. I assumed a one-night connection at a PAC event didn't constitute grounds for a paternity conversation with 3 alpha kings who had a territory to run, and approximately 0 reason to factor an unregistered Omega into their lives." "You assumed wrong," Crew said. Quiet. Simple. No performance attached to it. I looked at him. He was watching Theo drink his bottle, and there was something on his face that was completely undefended in a way that felt almost inappropriate, like accidentally seeing something private. "You don't know that," I said, and my voice came out softer than I planned. "You didn't know he existed until 3 weeks ago." "No," Crew said. But I knew something was missing. The words landed without warning. No build-up, no dramatic pause before them. Just 6 words dropped into the room like something he'd been carrying for a long time and had simply decided quietly to set down. My telepathy didn't even need to reach for him to feel what was behind it. I felt it in my own chest instead. And that was so much worse. I turned back to Theo's bottle because I needed something to do with my face. He was drinking steadily now, both fists wrapped around the plastic, eyes half closed with the specific bliss of a person whose only problem in the world was now being solved. I envied him that. Deeply. Completely. With my whole chest. "Something was missing," I said, keeping my voice conversational, like we were discussing the weather or a mildly interesting podcast. That's a big thing to say to someone you spent one night with 14 months ago. It's an honest thing, Crew said. Honest can still be big. Would you prefer I lied? I looked at him then, really looked, and the problem with Crew Calloway was that he looked back with the same energy. No deflection, no performance. Just direct, quiet attention that made me feel like the only person in the room, even when his two brothers were standing 6 feet away. I'd prefer, I said carefully, that everyone in this apartment understood where the lines are before anybody starts saying things that can't be unsaid. Cole made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not one either. Lines, he said. You want to talk about lines. You hid our child for 8 months and you want to establish lines. I didn't hide him. I simply didn't announce him. That is the same thing. Legally, it is not. Elliot. Cole. He pushed off the window frame, and I got my first real look at his face without the careful irritation covering it. And what was underneath was not what I expected. It wasn't anger. It was something rawer and more honest than anger. The look of someone who'd spent months building a version of a story in their head and was now standing inside the real one, and finding that all the walls were in different places. Why? He said. Just that. No sharpness in it anymore. Just the word, open and unguarded. And somehow that was harder to answer than anything aggressive would have been. I was quiet for 3 seconds. Theo finished his bottle and made a sound of profound satisfaction. I lifted him to my shoulder and started patting his back. And the familiar rhythm of it gave my hands something to do while my mouth figured out how to be honest without being demolished by the honesty. Because I had nothing, I said. No pack registration, no alpha bond, no status that would have held up in any pack court in Colorado. If I had come to you 3 and said, here, I'm pregnant, the child is yours. What do you think happens next? Silence. I'll tell you what happens, I continued. Best case scenario. You believe me, and suddenly my life, my choices, my body, and my son are subject to pack law and Calloway family decisions. Worst case, you don't believe me, and I spend the next 2 years in a legal process that an unregistered Omega with no pack backing loses every single time. We would have believed you, Caden said. You don't know that. You didn't know me. One night doesn't mean you know someone well enough to trust them with something that size. No, he said. But it meant enough that I kept your contact in my phone for 14 months without deleting it. The patting rhythm on Theo's back stuttered. Just once. I recovered immediately. But Caden saw it. His eyes were too precise not to. I kept my face neutral through what I can only describe as an Olympic-level feat of emotional suppression. That's not an argument, I said. It's not an argument, he agreed. It's a fact. I don't know what to do with it any more than you do, but it's there. My telepathy gave one slow pulse, and I caught the edge of his mind before I could stop it. Just the surface, just the texture. It felt like a room that had been kept very clean for a very long time. Every surface ordered, every emotion filed in its proper place, and in the center of all that careful structure, one thing sitting out of order. A name. My name. I pulled my walls back up so fast I felt it behind my eyes like a pressure change. Theo burped spectacularly. The tension in the room broke clean in half. Cole actually laughed that time. A real one. Short and surprised and completely unguarded, and it changed his whole face, softened the sharp edges of it into something that looked younger and genuinely warm. Crew smiled, quiet and private, like he was keeping the moment for himself. Even Caden's mouth moved. Just slightly. Just enough. Good boy, I told Theo, settling him back against my hip. He looked extremely pleased with himself. Okay, I said, and my voice had lost some of its armor without me making a conscious choice about it. You brought formula. You came here without lawyers or pack enforcers, which I notice and appreciate. You haven't made a single legal threat in the last 40 minutes. I looked at all three of them. What do you actually want from tonight? Caden looked at Theo, then at me. To start, he said. 2 words, careful and precise as everything else he said. But underneath them, my ability caught something he hadn't fully locked down. Not a thought. Not words. Just the feeling of a man who had been standing outside a door for a very long time, finally deciding to knock. And the terrifying thing, the thing I absolutely could not afford to examine right now, was that somewhere behind my own walls, something in me had already reached for the handle. I did not reach any further. Instead, I did what I was genuinely excellent at, which was taking a feeling that had no business existing and putting it somewhere it could not cause structural damage. I had a whole system for this. Years of practice. You did not survive as an unregistered telepathic Omega in a pack-governed state without learning exactly how to compartmentalize things that would otherwise take you apart. I set Theo on his playmat, handed him his favorite rubber giraffe, and turned back to the room. To start, I said, repeating Caden's words back at him. What does that mean practically? Because I need practical right now. I cannot do abstract. It means we want to be involved, Cole said. Involved how? In his life, in yours, if you'll allow it. Those are 2 very different conversations, and I'd prefer to have them separately. Fair, Crew said. Cole shot him a look. Crew ignored it with the peaceful energy of a man who had made peace with being ignored and simply stopped caring. So we're not asking you to move into the compound tonight, Caden said. Good, because the answer to that would be a very fast no. We're asking for time, scheduled visits, a chance to know him. He paused. And a chance for him to know us. I looked at Theo. He was chewing on the giraffe's ear with focused intensity, completely unbothered by the fact that his entire origin story was currently being negotiated 4 feet above his head. The thing was, I had thought about this. In the quiet dark of Theo's 3 a.m. feedings, with his warm weight against my chest and the Denver night pressing against the windows, I had thought about what it would mean for him to grow up without this, without the people whose storm gray eyes he'd inherited, whose scent markers were already written into his biology in ways no amount of my careful planning could erase. I had told myself it was fine, that I was enough, that plenty of Omegas raised children alone and did it beautifully. All of that was true. And also, in the deepest and most honest part of me that I visited as rarely as possible, I had known it wasn't the whole truth. Scheduled visits, I said, with conditions. Name them, Caden said immediately. He doesn't go to the compound without me. Not yet, not until I have reason to trust the environment. Agreed. The speed of that agreement caught me slightly off guard. I kept my expression even. No pack legal claims filed without my prior knowledge and consent. Agreed. And nobody, not pack lawyers, not family members, not well-meaning neighbors who apparently file secondary dependent reports without asking, puts Theo's name in any registry without talking to me first. A pause. Slightly longer than the previous 2. Agreed, Caden said. With one condition of our own. I raised an eyebrow. You tell us when you need something. You don't sit on an empty formula canister for 6 hours because asking feels like losing ground. My jaw tightened. That's not a condition. That's a criticism. It's both, he said, without any apology attached to it. The honest thing about Caden Calloway, the thing that made him harder to argue with than his brothers, was that he never dressed his observations up as anything other than what they were. No softening, no performance of sensitivity. Just the thing, stated plainly. And then he waited while you decided what to do with it. I decided to be annoyed about it quietly and move on. Fine, I said. Cole exhaled. It was the exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for considerably longer than the last hour. and the relief in it was so human and unguarded that my walls flickered again without warning. What hit me from him in that half-second was not something I was prepared for. It was guilt. Specific, heavy, long-carried guilt. The kind that had a shape to it. The kind that knew exactly what it was guilty of and had been living with the knowledge for a long time. I snapped my walls back up, but the texture of it stayed with me, and something about it felt wrong. Not wrong like a lie. Wrong like a detail that didn't fit the picture I thought I was looking at. Like finding a door in a house that shouldn't have one. I filed it. I would deal with it later. Crew was on the floor. I don't know when that had happened. But somewhere in the last few minutes, he had lowered himself onto the playmat across from Theo, long legs folded, and was now engaged in what appeared to be a deeply serious exchange involving the rubber giraffe. Theo would offer it. Crew would take it solemnly. Theo would take it back with a triumphant squeal. Repeat. It was the most uncomplicated thing happening in the room by a significant margin. "He has your hands," Crew said, not looking up. "What?" "The way he holds things. Doc the grip." He glanced up at me. "It's yours." I had no idea how he knew what my grip looked like. I had no idea why that observation sat somewhere warm and specific behind my sternum. I chose not to investigate either of those things. "He has all of your eyes," I said, because if we were stating facts, we could at least state them equally. Crew looked back at Theo. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He does." Caden's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something moved across his face fast and then disappeared, and my ability caught the edge of his reaction before he locked it down. It tasted like alarm. Controlled. Immediate. Gone in under a second. But alarm. He looked up and met Cole's eyes across the room, and something passed between them that had no words. The specific silent language of people who had been communicating since before they could speak. Cole's arms crossed again. The warmth that had been loosening his posture over the last 30 minutes clicked back into something guarded. "What?" I said. "Nothing," Caden said. My eye twitched. "Caden, I am a telepath. Do not say nothing to me when your face just did that." "My face didn't do anything. Your face did several things. What was that message?" He held my gaze for a moment, measuring something, and then made a decision I could feel before he spoke it. "The Pack Council knows we're here," he said. The room temperature dropped approximately 10 degrees. "And," I said carefully, "and they've called an emergency session." He paused. "About Theo." Everything in me went very still. Not the calm kind of still. The kind that happens in the second between stepping off a curb and realizing there's a car coming. "They don't have the right," I said. "He's unregistered. He's mine. Pack Council has no jurisdiction over an unregistered Omega's child without a formal—" "They're not convening about custody," Caden said. "Then what?" He looked at me, and for the first time since walking through my door, the courthouse stillness in his face cracked. Just slightly. Just enough to show what was underneath it. Something that looked a great deal like fear. "They're convening," he said, "because someone told them what Theo is." I stared at him. "He's 8 months old," I said slowly. "He's a baby. What he is 8 months old." "Elliot." Caden's voice was quiet, careful in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. His scent markers came back from the pack physician's analysis this morning. I waited. "He isn't presenting as Omega," he said. "He isn't presenting as Beta either." The giraffe squeaked. Theo laughed. "He's presenting as a Class 1 Alpha," Caden said. "All 3 lines. I simultaneously." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Because a child presenting with all 3 Calloway Alpha lines at 8 months old wasn't just unusual. It was the thing Pack prophecy had been built around for 200 years. And someone had just told the council. I stood in the middle of my 400-square-foot studio apartment in Denver, Colorado, holding a rubber giraffe that my son had just handed me with great ceremony. And I said the only thing my brain could produce in that moment. Run that back. Caden held my gaze. Theo is presenting all 3 Calloway Alpha bloodlines simultaneously. It has never happened in recorded pack history. The physician's report went to the council before we could intercept it. Before you could intercept it, I repeated. So you knew about the results before tonight. A pause. 1 second too long. Caden. We received a preliminary flag this morning, he said. We came here tonight because of it. The giraffe in my hand felt very far away suddenly. So the formula, the bag on the counter, the careful agreements and the quiet, reasonable conversation about scheduled visits and conditions. All of that was real, I believed that. But it had also happened because they had known before they knocked on my door that my son was not just their child. He was something the pack had a name for. What prophecy? I said. Now Cole and Caden exchanged another one of their wordless conversations. I pointed between them. Stop doing that. What prophecy? The triune ascendant, Crew said from the floor. He was still sitting with Theo, but his voice had shifted. Quieter. Carrying weight it hadn't carried a minute ago. The what? I said. It's old pack doctrine, Caden said. Western Cascade lineage, going back about 200 years. The records say that when 3 alpha bloodlines converge in a single heir, born of an omega not bound to any pack, that child becomes a triune ascendant, a child capable of unifying fractured pack territories under one line. I stared at him. So, what you're telling me, I said very slowly, is that my 8-month-old, who just discovered he can blow raspberries and finds ceiling fans genuinely thrilling, is apparently some kind of pack messiah. That's a reductive interpretation, Cole said. Is it wrong? A beat. It's not entirely wrong, he admitted. I sat down on the couch. Not gracefully. Just sat, the way you sit when your legs make a unilateral decision without consulting the rest of you. Theo looked at me from Crew's lap. He held out the giraffe with both hands, offering it back with the generous spirit of someone who understood that things had just gotten complicated and toys helped. Thank you, baby, I said, and took it. My telepathy was running completely without my permission now. I'd picking up signals from all 3 of them like a radio that had lost its tuning. Not words, not clear thoughts, just the emotional texture of the room, and what I was getting was layered and complicated, and not entirely about the prophecy. From Caden. That controlled alarm again, but underneath it something protective had activated, structured and absolute. The mental equivalent of someone moving to stand between a threat and something they had already decided mattered. And from Cole, that guilt again. Specific and shaped and sitting on top of everything else like it had been there longest. From Crew, something quieter. A kind of grief I didn't have context for. Not about Theo. Something older. I filed all of it. Okay, I said, because falling apart was not on tonight's agenda and I refused to add it. Who on the council knows? The full session was called, which means all 12 members, Caden said. How fast can they move? On something like this? They could file a triune protection order within 48 hours. It's an old law, but it's still on the books. It would give the council joint guardianship authority over Theo until he reaches alpha majority. The word guardianship hit me like cold water. Over my body, I said. Technically over his status, not his person. But in practice, they'd be making decisions about my son's life without my consent. I stood back up. Ein sitting felt too passive for what I was currently feeling. No, absolutely not. That is not happening. We agree, Caden said. Do you? I looked at him hard. Because 48 hours is not a lot of runway, and the council has 12 members with 2 centuries of doctrine on their side, and I have a telepathy headache, $43, and a baby who thinks ceiling fans are entertainment. You also have us, Cole said. I looked at him. He was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, and the careful irritation that had been his default expression all evening was completely gone. What was underneath it was focused and serious, and something else I kept catching edges of without being able to name. The council cannot override the biological fathers if we formally acknowledge Theo tonight, Caden said. A joint acknowledgement filing from all three of us, combined with your parental standing, gives Theo protected status outside council jurisdiction. You've already talked to a lawyer, I said. We talked to 3. When? On the drive here. I pressed my fingers against my temple. Of course they had. Of course these men had driven to my apartment with formula and a legal strategy already mapped out. And the infuriating thing, the deeply inconvenient thing, was that I could not even be fully angry about it because my son needed both the formula and the legal strategy, and standing on principle while Theo got handed over to a pack council was not a principle, it was just pride wearing a coat. If you file acknowledgement tonight, I said carefully, what does that change for me? Legally, you retain full primary custody and parental decision authority. We get structured visitation rights and the ability to protect him under pack law. Caden paused. So nothing changes for you without your agreement. That's not a negotiation tactic. That's the actual terms. I looked at Crew. He was watching me with that steady, undefended attention. You've been quiet, I said. You needed to hear them first, he said. And now? He considered that. Now I want to tell you something that's not about lawyers or councils or prophecy. Go ahead. He was quiet for one moment. Not the hesitant kind, the deliberate kind. Not the kind where a person makes sure they mean what they're about to say before they say it. I don't care what the doctrine calls him, Crew said. I care that he's been here for 8 months and I missed it. And I care that you carried that alone because you didn't think we'd choose you. He held my gaze. I want you to know that was always going to be the wrong assumption. The room was very quiet. Sorry, Theo looked between us with the focused attention of someone following a conversation he couldn't quite translate but understood was important. My walls were up. Firmly. Completely. But the thing about Crew Calloway was that he didn't need my telepathy to reach me. He just needed to say the true thing plainly. And then Cole's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Every bit of warmth that had been building in the room over the last 10 minutes drained out of his face in 1 second flat. Ah, Cole, Caden said. Cole looked up, and what was on his face was something I had never seen there before. Something that looked like the specific expression of a person who has just realized the thing they were afraid of has already happened. It's not the council, he said. His voice was flat. Strange. It's our brother. The air changed. Caden went very still. Crew's eyes cut to Cole with an intensity that rewrote everything I thought I knew about his quietness. We don't have a brother, I said slowly, looking between them. You're triplets. There's 3 of you. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Cole looked at Caden. Caden looked at the floor. And Crew, who had been the steadiest presence in the room all evening, closed his eyes briefly like a man bracing for something he had been dreading for a very long time. There are 4 of us, Caden said quietly. The giraffe slipped out of my hand. Nobody moved to pick it up. I stood in the center of my apartment looking at 3 men who had, in the span of one evening, rearranged everything I thought I understood about the night that changed my life. And I said the only thing available to me. Start talking right now. Caden picked up the giraffe, set it on the counter, clasped his hands in front of him like he was about to deliver a prepared statement to a boardroom and was using the familiar posture to hold himself together. Cassian, he said. Our 4th. Oh, he's not identical. Different mother, same father. He came into the pack line through acknowledgement when we were 19. And you didn't mention him because Cassian is the one who filed the physician's report with the council, Cole said. His voice was flat and careful in the specific way of someone controlling something large. Tonight, 2 hours before we got here. Everything recalibrated. That guilt I had been catching off Cole all evening. Specific, shaped, long carried. I understood its shape now. He knew about Theo before tonight, I said. Not a question. We think he's known for weeks, Crew said quietly. Possibly longer? And he went to the council instead of coming to you. Yes. I thought about that for exactly 5 seconds. Why? I said. Caden was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant the answer was complicated, and he was deciding how honest to be. I watched him make the decision. Cassian has always believed the pack leadership should consolidate, he said. Fewer voices, more centralized authority. He and I have disagreed about it for years. A triune ascendant heir, under council protection rather than parental custody, would shift the balance of pack power significantly. He paused. Away from us, toward the council, toward him. The full picture assembled itself in my mind with cold, horrible clarity. Cassian had found out about Theo, had seen not a child, and not a nephew, not a miracle, but a political instrument. Had moved fast and quiet to put that instrument somewhere it would serve his interests before his brothers could reach me first. My son. My 8-month-old who loved ceiling fans and rubber giraffes and had just learned to take his first steps. A political instrument. Something shifted in me. Quietly. Permanently. Call your lawyer, I said. Caden blinked, just once. Now? Cole said. It's Tuesday night. It is, I said. And the council can move in 48 hours. So I want the joint acknowledgement filing started in the next 30 minutes. I want Theo's parental protection status locked before morning, and then I want someone to explain to me exactly what Cassian Calloway looks like so I know whose face to put on my mental list of people I will be having a very direct conversation with at the earliest opportunity. A beat of silence. Then Cole laughed. Genuine and full and completely unguarded. The best version of the laugh I'd been catching edges of all night. There it is, he said, and he was looking at me like he'd been waiting for that specific version of me to show up and was deeply relieved it had. Caden already had his phone to his ear. Crew picked Theo up from the playmat, settled him against his chest, and looked at me over my son's dark curls with an expression that was quiet and warm and entirely undefended. Thank you, he said. For what? For not running. I held his gaze for a moment. My walls were still up, firmly maintained. But I let myself feel, just briefly, just honestly, the specific weight of this moment. 3 men in my apartment at whatever ungodly hour it currently was. One of them on the phone with a lawyer, one of them looking at me like I'd just handed him something he didn't know how to hold yet, and one of them standing with my son like Theo had always been exactly where he belonged. I thought about it, I admitted. The running. I know, Crew said. You stayed anyway. Theo needed formula. His mouth curved, small and genuine. Sure. That's the only reason. Absolutely. I looked away first because looking at Crew Calloway for too long did something inconvenient to my structural integrity, and I had paperwork to think about. The next hour moved fast. Caden's lawyer was, apparently, I was the kind of person who answered phones at 11 at night and did not sound even slightly bothered by it, which told me everything I needed to know about what it meant to be a Calloway. The filing started within 20 minutes. Joint acknowledgement of paternity, all 3 names, time-stamped and submitted to the Colorado PAC registry before midnight. Cole made coffee in my kitchen like he'd done it before, finding the mugs without asking, and I chose not to examine how natural that looked. I sat at my small kitchen table with Caden across from me, going through the document language line by line, and the thing about doing something practical together was that it quietly dismantled the last of the formality between us. He stopped being a courthouse. I stopped being a fortress. We became 2 people with a shared investment, reading the same sentences, making the same marginal decisions, occasionally disagreeing on wording and finding, with some surprise, that the disagreements resolved faster than either of us expected. At one point, he looked up from the document and said, "You're good at this." I have a theater minor and a survival instinct, I said. Reading the fine print was mandatory. The corner of his mouth moved. I meant the negotiating. I know what you meant. He held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. I held it back. Neither of us said anything else about it. But the something that had been building quietly in the room all evening, that unnamed thing with no category yet, settled a little more solidly into the space between us. By midnight, the filing was confirmed. By 12:15, Theo was asleep in his crib, one fist curled under his chin, breathing the slow, steady breath of a person with absolutely no concept of how dramatically his Tuesday had just shifted. I stood in the doorway of his small room and looked at him. Crew appeared at my shoulder. Quiet, as always. He looked at Theo the way he'd been looking at him all evening, with that open, unguarded wonder that had been undoing me since the first moment I saw it. He's going to be something, Crew said softly. He already is, I said. A pause. Yeah, Crew agreed. He really is. We stood there for a moment, the two of us in the doorway, and it felt like something. Not a declaration, not a promise, just a beginning, honest and unforced. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Back in the living room, Cole was on his phone, quietly coordinating something I trusted was Cassian-related, and therefore did not ask about because I needed at least 6 hours of sleep before I was equipped to feel anything about that situation. Caden was standing by the window, looking out at the Denver night, and when I came back into the room, he turned and looked at me with those precise storm-gray eyes. The council will push back, he said. Cassian won't stop at one move. This gets harder before it gets easier. I know, I said. You don't have to do it alone anymore. The words landed simply. No drama underneath them. Just the fact of it, offered without condition. I looked at him for a long moment. My telepathy, which had been running hot all evening, gave one last quiet pulse. Not intrusive, just present. And what I caught from Caden in that unguarded sliver was not a strategy or a calculation or a carefully filed emotion. It was just warmth. Steady and real and patient as stone. I know, I said again, and this time I meant something different by it. Cole looked up from his phone. His eyes moved between me and Caden, and he made a sound that was mostly a smirk with aspirations of becoming a smile. So, he said, same time Thursday? We could bring actual groceries. You could call first, I said. We could, he agreed. We won't, but we could. Theo made a sound from his crib, a small, sleepy, satisfied sound, the sound of a person completely at peace with his circumstances. I pressed my hand against the doorframe. 3 men who had walked into my apartment 90 minutes ago as the most terrifying thing I could imagine were now standing in my living room looking like something else entirely. Something that didn't have a name yet but was forming one, quietly, in the space between all the things we hadn't said. Thursday, I said. Bring groceries. Knock first. Cole raised his coffee mug like a toast. Crew smiled at the floor. Caden looked at me and said nothing, which from him was the most complete sentence in the room. I thought about 8 months of doing this alone. In the 3 a.m. feedings and the empty canisters and the carefully maintained invisibility and the nights when loving Theo so much it lived in my throat wasn't always enough to keep the loneliness from sitting beside me on the couch. I thought about a wrong number sent to the right people. I thought about how sometimes the most terrifying thing and the thing you needed most turned out to be the same door. I hadn't opened it all the way. Not yet. We had a 4th brother to deal with. A council to outmaneuver, a prophecy none of us had asked for, and approximately 14 months of emotional history to navigate with care. But the door was open, and on the other side of it, for the first time in a very long time, something felt like it was finally beginning instead of ending. Theo slept peacefully, and I let myself, quietly and without ceremony, feel something I had not let myself feel in 8 months. Safe. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Hit subscribe. The next story drops soon.